So you clicked on this video and it said Jake Paul and Ian Garry. You're wondering, what does this have to do with anything other than these two guys in a business deal together with a better, what do you call it? Maybe it's a gambling site of some sort, or maybe some sort of sports company. But nonetheless, Ian Garry is sponsored by none other than Jake Paul's company. And other than that, there's another thing they have in common, which I think is really important to point out. And that is the acceptance of child abuse in many homes around the world, and especially in the United States. So let's just call it what it is, the Western world, for that matter. Now, it's not to say that obviously these things go on in all different cultures and all different countries. So to classify it as this is a Western problem or this is a third world problem or anything like that, I think is just really misrepresented and inaccurate. So we're going to give you the absolute accuracy of this particular debate, because a lot of people really believe till this day that beating your kids will somehow create some sort of deterrence or some sort of compliance when they have some issues with, let's say, following orders or listening to their parents and not taking the advice of what they want to, what you want to give them in terms of what is good for them to survive in this world. Okay, so all that is completely understandable. I think there is a medium line, and then there's an extreme line, and then there's a real far left line, which is the quintessential wussy of however you want to really define it to be in how you parent other kids, right? In other words, the extreme side of it is you do nothing at all in terms of disciplining your kid. And then the other side of it is beating your kid to a pulp because they wouldn't listen to you. Now, that is the absolute extreme side of things and is completely unacceptable by any standards of any society and any way of life. There's no disputing that. However, there's still people out there that believe if you do this to kids, it will make them better. For example, you look at what happened with Jake Paul when he mentions this in the Logan Paul podcast about the fact that he admits his dad went and beat him as kids. And why is this important to really point out? Because Jake's dad said in rebuttal to that, look what it made you. It made you a professional boxer. It made you a famous YouTuber influencer. It made you a hard worker. Now, the problem with that statement is people always attribute the constant, motions of, what is that? Somebody's on fire. Hey, that's what it is, right? It's live right here, and you never know what's happening. Maybe it's just, a bunch of fire truck guys just trying to get out of traffic. Looks like they're making a U-turn of some sort. But anyways, where was I? I'm not editing that. I don't edit any of these videos, so I give you these videos as they come and as they go. But what I was saying was that whenever somebody attributes someone's success, they always look back at the harsh treatment that they received as a kid as some sort of merit to say that, look what I made out of you by doing this. Look what I did by instilling discipline in you. Look what I did by smacking you or slapping you around when you got out of line. The problem is, there's no way of measuring that. What is the accurate metric in understanding a person's success in relationship to how badly they were treated as a kid? Now, will it create some sort of driving mechanism and some sort of motivation inside you? 100%. That is a reality that you absolutely have to touch bases with. That can absolutely happen. The other side of that is you got to understand you're dealing with a 50-50 chance. In other words, you're rolling the dice and you're playing with slot casinos and you don't know what you're going to get. So in other words, there is a possibility that you can make the kids stronger by doing that, but more than likely what you're going to do is create a sociopath, a psychopath, and somebody that is extremely antisocial to the point where these people can't function in society, i.e. criminals, i.e. serial killers, and everything in between that you want to classify within those ranks. That's the reality of what you're going to get. So this idea of, oh, it's okay to hit kids, well, I turned out okay, but what you don't realize, those people that say that, is that you are probably one of the few people in the world that have survived that. And you cannot go off of the strength off of one individual as opposed to another. Because guess what? We're all made differently. I'm not breaking any news, am I, by saying that we're all made differently. We're all different human beings. We're all not created equal in a certain way. I mean, we're created equal in a way where God created us in one particular way, which is what? That one way is that we all come from a woman. Now, I'm not breaking any news here, am I? I'm not trying to, create some sort of controversial headlines by saying that, am I? There's one way every human being is made, and there's no way around that. However, how we grow up, the environment, and the attributes that we have can differ from one person to another, and that is something you have to take into high consideration. Because if you don't, you're not looking at reality. You're only looking at anecdotal statements and testimonies from other people that have somehow survived a horrific relationship with their parents or a horrific situation with their loved ones, or whatever horrific situation they dealt with in their lives. And in particular, in this particular subject that we're talking about, child abuse. So, once again, one of the things that people have to understand is that this is not as easy as just tossing it up to, okay, you know what? We're going to treat our kids this way because they're going to listen to everything that we say, and we have the deterrence and the aggressive repercussions that come with that. And somehow because of this, they're going to listen because it worked with one guy, it made him successful. This one guy became an engineer. This one guy became a doctor. This one guy became Khabib. Not that Khabib's parents ever did that to him, although some argue within Western standards and their Orientalist view of the Muslim world is that somehow it's a savage way of living of trying to get a kid wrestle bears, when in fact the one career you're trying to get this kid ready for is in the world of prize fighting. But to some people, that's not a great standard of raising your kids. I remember Conor McGregor's dad mentioning this in an interview that he did when he was in his Las Vegas hotel room in the fight week of UFC 229 between Khabib and Conor McGregor. He mentioned something to the effect of that this is a child abuse, or this is not the way to raise kids, basically slagging off Khabib's dad for making Khabib wrestle bears. But nonetheless, what McGregor's dad fails to realize is that in some sort of way, he probably abused his kid growing up too. And this goes into what Garry is saying in terms of what he's experienced as a kid. Now, what are some things that he's experienced as a kid? He's mentioned this in his post-fight press conference after the fight. He said, you don't think that I've been whacked a few times as a kid? But what he wanted to do, and what he said, was he wanted to break the cycle. Now, I need you guys to understand something. I don't agree with what Garry did to promote this fight, simply because I truly believe that it's low-hanging fruit, and then on top of that, it's not really what Neil Magny meant to say. And I keep going on about this over and over again in different podcasts, but hey, why not? It's a very interesting subject. I made an entire video out of it, not just with Garry's situation and his fight with Neil Magny, but I somehow created a content that deals with Jake Paul and a revelation that he did in the Netflix series that he was featured in, which, by the way, was hinted by none other than Dylan Dennis in the pre-fight presser with Dylan Dennis, KSI, Logan Paul, and Tommy Fury. He mentions this, very significant to understanding the psychology of the Logan Paul brothers. Because you got to think, Okay, is Jake a successful guy? 100%. You can't deny success. Numbers don't lie. People's bank accounts don't lie. Clout doesn't lie. The fact that I'm making a video about this guy and many others out there that are making videos about them, that's not a lie, because they are what's hot in the world of entertainment and professional sports at the current moment. And in that particular, combat sports, boxing, and their involvement with MMA to a certain degree. That when the Paul brothers having the prime drinks with the UFC, and PFL Jake now signing with them, on top of the fact that Jake is boxing for millions of dollars while trying to go into MMA. And now we're trying to understand the psychology of this guy and how he grew up. Now, is he messed up in some kind of way? Look, man, I gotta tell you, everyone has their own opinion on things. Everyone has their own outlook on things. And everyone has their own viewpoint on how to somehow give an opinion on a person and maybe give a diagnosis or give some sort of assessment in a person. Everyone is going to have differing views, contrasting outlooks on this particular matter. But the one thing that you can't deny about Jake Paul is that there is a certain flaw in his personality, just like with Logan Paul, just like with anybody else. But you got to think, those personal flaws that they have, along with their success, is probably the reason why they are the way they are, based on the fact that they were abused as kids. And you can't deny that. You can't get away from that. It really surprises me how many people are going to attribute other people's success to the fact that you've been abused as a kid and somehow you rose above it. You know what? Here's something you got to understand. From something that I read with Jordan Peterson, and I thought that it was really brilliant how he put this. He said, you can't coddle the children. At a certain point, you have to give children a certain amount of, let's say, how do I say this? A certain amount of freedom, or a certain amount of trying to understand how they get out of things. For example, you put them in a crib. You got to teach them how to get out of a crib, meaning you got to teach them how to get out of their own. You got to teach them how to climb out of their own, how to climb into it, how to climb out of it. And then when they reach a certain stage as a kid, you up the challenges a little bit. Maybe you have them put on their clothes on their own at a certain age, even though it's cognitively difficult for them because maybe they don't have the right motor skills that they practice yet. Nonetheless, there's a certain level of freedom that you have to give to kids in order for them to understand their limits. So Jordan Peterson has a point in that. And I think that it's a great point. There's some moderation in that aspect. Also, you got to understand, from an Islamic perspective, do we hit our kids? I don't think we do. At least the majority of us don't. And when I mean the majority, I mean people that follow the Quran and the Sunnah and the teachings of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and everything that is revealed in the Quran. I don't think there is anything in the Quran that mentions that you should somehow beat a kid to a pulp. Now, are there certain punishments and certain deterrents that you do in order for you to negotiate a certain behavior out of your kid? In order for you to manipulate a certain action that you want out of them? Yes. For the greater good of their safety? Yes. For the greater good that they will grow up to be a great contributing member to society? Yes. This is all a reality. The problem that a lot of people have to understand is taking the extremes of anything. When you take the extremes of anything, you often fall into this situation where you cause problems for other people. You oppress other people. You make other people sad to the point where, let's say, they have a mental breakdown or they have mental health issues because of the way that you're probably raising your kids. Now, obviously, this is not a Quran statement that I'm about to say, but something along the lines that the Bible says, you can't spoil the kid or spare the rod, and something to that extent, meaning that you can't keep spoiling kids and not introduce them to the rod if they somehow get out of line. Now, look, we all have our own interpretations of religion. We all have our own outlooks on things. Perhaps maybe there was a certain alteration in the Bible that we can look at and investigate. But the one thing remains is that there is a balance between trying to discipline your kid, but at the same time, a balance in trying not to make them go crazy. And in conclusion to that, the one thing you got to realize is that, is there really the right way of parenting at all? Because just like what I mentioned earlier about Conor McGregor's dad, mentioning how Khabib's dad is somewhat of a child abuser because of the fact that he made him wrestle bears. You have to look at Conor McGregor's relationship with his dad as well. Now, one of the things Conor McGregor mentioned about his dad during an Ariel Helwani interview when they were walking around Dublin, I urge you guys to take a look at that. It's on the MMAfighting.com or the MMA Fighting YouTube channel back in 2014 when Conor McGregor was walking around with Ariel Helwani in Dublin. Conor said that his dad suffered from testicular cancer because he went and punched his dad down there in his Irish jewels. And you got to think to yourself, why did he do that? You can say, well, you know what? This is in line with everything that we know about Conor. Look at what happened in Ibiza. Look at what happened with all these fans that he runs across. Look at the old man at the pub. It's not really far-fetched for Conor McGregor to do that. Sure, you can look at that, but I always look at every side to the story. So yes, this is abuse on Conor's part, but you got to investigate and ask yourself, did Conor somehow get abused as a kid for him to learn to be able to go out there and just punch his dad like that? Because I can tell you, Khabib would never raise a hand on his dad, ever. Khabib wouldn't even raise a hand at Javier Mendez, who's not his dad, but the fact that his dad wasn't able to have a visa all those times when he was training here, Javier Mendez fulfilled that role. And how did he treat him? As a father figure, with respect. He would never hit him. So therefore, you got to think, okay, there's some good in Javier Mendez for him to never having to provoke Khabib in any kind of way. But what about Conor McGregor's dad? What about Khabib's dad? Did he provoke him in any way? Nope. But then you got to think, what is it about McGregor's dad that made Conor McGregor do that? You don't know. Ian Garry revealed to us what happened. Can you imagine being Ian Garry's dad right now? Right? You got a son who is now a top 10 UFC fighter in the UFC's 170-pound division. A very stacked division, a very famous division with some famous champions that goes back to the lineage of Pat Miletich, going all the way to Matt Hughes, Matt Serra, George St. Pierre, and then Kamaru Usman. And then Tyron Woodley is in there too. And Robbie Lawler and Johnny Hendricks, if you want to throw him in there, of course, with an asterisk. But you guys know what I mean by the asterisk with Johnny Hendricks' career, but that's neither here or there. This is Ian Garry, now fighting for that lineage of that particular championship. And then in the world stage of where he's fighting the guy that's going to catapult him, which is Neil Magny, he's talking about how this guy is saying that he went out and abused kids. And he's so driven by that. Now imagine being Ian Garry's dad, seeing that, humiliating you in front of the world. Is it warranted? Who knows? Only Ian Garry knows what kind of relationship he had with his dad, and only Conor McGregor himself knows the kind of true relationship he had with his dad for him to get into these types of actions that I had just mentioned earlier, punching his dad in the nads and then giving him testicular cancer as a result of it. So you have to really understand the situation at hand. Yes, it created champions and it created contenders and great fighters and most of all, great men and fathers in Ian Garry and Conor McGregor and all of that. But you got to think, it does affect their personality in the long run. You can have all the successes in the world, right? Because this is one thing that a lot of parents really focus on. They constantly focus on the success of their kids, and rightfully so. Why would you not? There are parents that want their kids to be doctors. There are parents that want their kids to be Tom Brady, that want their kids to be LeBron James, Michael Jordan. They want their kids to be Ronaldo. They want their kids to be David Beckham. They want their kids to be just an engineer, or maybe just a nurse, or maybe a police officer, or maybe a special forces operator of some sort. whatever ambitions you have for your kid, everybody tries to mold their kid into whatever it is that they want. But oftentimes, the one thing that a lot of people never talk about are the failures that come with that. And I know it's harsh to say that, but when I mean failure, I mean that you planned this one thing for this kid, for him to be something, and then he turned out to be something else because maybe he didn't have the right skill, or maybe he didn't have the same desire to go into the career that you wished him to be part of. But the reality is, the one thing you got to understand, there are consequences to every actions that you do. There are positive return investments in some risks that you take. The problem is, you just don't know what the future holds for tomorrow. So that is why you have to be on your P's and Q's with the actions that you take. Because if you don't, then you're going to cause a lifelong trauma that I don't think most people can come back from. And by the way, some people are resilient, some people can take it, some people are going to rise above it. But what if they don't? And that right there is the gamble that you're dealing with. And why do I call it a gamble? Because there's a lot of actions that you're really taking, upon displaying this certain aggression with your kid. When you're taking these types of actions, they're going to remember it. And they're going to resent you. And when they resent you, then it'll be very hard to get back from that. So, we're talking about combat sports athletes, but at the same time, we're also talking about life. And I think it's really important to bring up these particular topics and subjects, because a lot of people really don't take any of this into consideration. They just go about their life. They don't think about tomorrow. They don't think about the long-term consequences of their actions. But if there's one thing that Garry said best, whether you agree with what he said about Neil Magny or whether you don't, the one thing I think anybody and everybody can agree with what he said is that you got to break the cycle at some point. So, with this particular content, I don't know if we've solved any particular issues, which, by the way, we didn't. And that's the point that I'm trying to make, is that there is no right way or wrong way of going about things. There's only consequences to the transgressions that you take.